peace and security remains a pertinent issue on the African continent. Now, this was the sentiment shared at the opening of the 4th annual joint retreat of the African Union Peace and Security Council and the African Peer Review Mechanism, also known as APRM, in Johannesburg. The theme of the two-day gathering centers on the importance of governance and how it can influence conflict prevention as the continent continues to face numerous disputes. Now, as conflicts continue to intensify in the countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, many civilians are left to fend for themselves. According to the APRM, 80 million children are affected by the conflicts on the continent. Some believe that good governance will be an effective mechanism to prevent conflicts on the continent. The joint retreat will conclude on Tuesday, when the Peace and Security Council and the APRM will continue to discuss ways to bring peace to the African continent.
In too many of our regions, civilians continue to bear the heaviest burden of conflict and institutional failures, whether through forced displacements, gender-based violence, or limited access to basic services. We must reaffirm that the protection of civilians is not the responsibility of peacekeepers alone, but it is a central pillar of a good and effective governance.
All right, for more on the 4th annual joint retreat of the African Union and Peace and Security Council, as well as the African Peer Review Mechanism, we cross live to our reporter Khayelihle Khumalo. Good evening, Khayelihle. A very timely retreat, many would say. There's conflict in several parts of the continent. Violence is persisting. Just talk us through the agenda of this joint retreat.
Well, certainly, Mfundo, a very important moment here in South Africa. As you know, that this is a joint annual retreat, but also coming at a very critical time when you look at what's happening in the African continent, a myriad of challenges. And one of the very key instruments that the leaders here, they really just want to make sure that good governance really prevails in the African continent. But where we're positioned currently, you know, it's just on the sidelines of the celebration of 22 years since the establishment of the African Peer Review Mechanism here in Pretoria at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. So one of the main issues, Mfundo, that has been mentioned here by the speakers, from the head of the APRM, Ambassador Mary Antoinette Rutre, really just talking about the issue of making sure that Africa develops its own mechanisms in terms of early warning systems, in tackling the conflicts, but also in the main in terms of making sure that we see also just political stability prevailing. I mean, you go back to 2003 when this particular instrument was established. So the vision for the African leaders was really just making sure that we do see sustainable development, we see poverty being eradicated. So it's all just boils down to the issue of good governance in the African continent.
Now, this is not a novel call. I mean, we've heard all of this before. So what do they intend to do differently this time around? Because when we talk good governance, this is something that has been preached for the longest time, even when you speak of the early warning systems or just a more responsive AU itself. These are things they've been talking about for the longest time. So what will they do to guard against this just perhaps being another talk session?
Well, absolutely, Mfundo. I think what is very key in this instance is for institutions like APRM really to be at the forefront, but they really just collaborate with so many sectors, the civil society. I suppose that's a very pertinent question in terms of a different approach in tackling these challenges facing the African continent. But I suppose there's a very clear focus now in terms of the early warning systems, in terms of dealing with all these challenges facing the African continent, whether you're looking at the issues around development, issues around making sure that there is stability, but issues around the implementation of Agenda 2063. So the likes of APRM, it serves as a very key vehicle, as a very key institution in terms of driving that particular purpose, but also going back to that retreat as well with the AU Peace and Security Council. I suppose issues of security are incredibly important, especially now, Mfundo, as you know, the geopolitical tension in so many parts of the world. Obviously, there'll be so many sessions that will be closed where the media won't be allowed, but there'll be a very clear indication in terms of making sure that Africa is able to craft, for example, common position in tackling these issues, especially also where also you do have the conflicts in terms of the way forward, in terms of the AU Peace and Security Council. You look at the current situation in South Sudan, for example, where we've seen the escalation of hostilities, but also you're looking at Sudan and Khartoum. I mean, they talk about the massive humanitarian crisis, and also you look at the Sahel, the destabilization caused by terrorism. So a very big issue for the African continent. And also when the AU Peace and Security Council is having this particular gathering with the APRM, I suppose it's all about forging those initiatives that will benefit the African continent to overcome all these challenges.
And I suppose, Khaya, all of them appreciate that there's never been a more critical time than now to actually have a more responsive Peace and Security Council, purely because of the shifts that we're seeing insofar as international support is concerned, especially when you look at America and just its posture to Africa as a whole. So given that there must be an appreciation of the need for a more responsive Peace and Security Council, what honestly are they intending to do?
Well, certainly, especially because, Mfundo, that has always been a main criticism facing the AU Peace and Security Council, whether is it proactive enough? If there is a crisis breaking out, are they able to assemble and look at the solutions and just be very quite responsive in terms of tackling these challenges? I suppose that's always a very key question for the AU Peace and Security Council. I mean, you look at the recent situation in the eastern part of DRC, where we've seen so many sessions that they've held, where they've been calling for cessation of hostilities, but also calling for the engagement between the warring parties to prioritize a diplomatic solution. I suppose the criticism of how responsive is this continental structure is always there, but you always get a sense that they just want to make sure that they find long-lasting solutions for the African continent. But also in the main, for example, it's a very important time where there's so much happening in the world in terms of the geopolitics. You look at the response with the sweeping tariffs from the US. How will the African continent be able to respond in terms of really just getting its acts together? For example, if they talk about the continental free trade area. So these are very economic issues, but you know that for you to have a thriving economy, security is a primary issue that you need to address. I think there is a realization from the African leaders. I think that's why they've expanded the role of the African peer review mechanism to make sure that it becomes an implementing agency of the AU, monitoring progress in Africa, but also promoting that culture of the peers in the continent working together, having those comprehensive reports. But what is always a challenge is around the implementation. Will the member states implement those reports? What can be done in terms of making sure that they get to the bottom of these challenges?
We hope there will be some meaningful conclusions that lead to implementation beyond this session. Khayelihle, thank you very much for that reportage. That's SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, who's at the 4th annual joint retreat of the African Union Peace and Security Council and the African Peer Review Mechanism.